The Final Fantasy XIV FanFest in Berlin is in the not-too-distant future, and it is there that we'll get even more information about Final Fantasy XIV's next expansion, Evercold. But before we do, you guys have some theories that we need to break down. We need to dissect them and see if anyone might be on the money today. Hello, everybody. It's your boy, Jmulls. Let's get crazy with it. First up on the docket today, we have @Faye_Lionheart, who says, the one-eyed aura is Zenos' new body, just a guess. Look, I had to do it. I had to get a Zenos theory out of my system. Asking me not to cover Zenos is like asking a baker not to make a cake. It's like asking a chef not to cook, a machinist to be useful. We can't be unrealistic here. And lesser men may look at a theory like this and quickly dismiss it, but not around these parts. Do I think it's likely? Not particularly, but do I think it's possible? I do think it is possible. I think there's a way you could write that. In the Stormblood patches, we have seen Zenos take, well, another body. He wasn't in the traditional Zenos Chad form that we all know and love. Could something similar be happening here? Sure, it is indeed possible, especially when we're in the middle of a story where Halmarut took the memories of Calyx from the Endless form, because the dude like Cloud saved himself and put himself into the squirrel plushie. Theoretically, you could argue the same could be said for Zenos if we go off the idea and theory, again not definitive, that Halmarut traveled to the edge of the universe where we did our 1v1 against my goat, my guiding moonlight, Zenos Ye Galvus, where perhaps she got the imagery of his scythe to conjure up during our meeting with her on the moon. There are ways to write this. Do I think it's likely? No, but do I think that we will see Zenos' presence or influence in some shape or form going forward, not just counting Zero because, well, she was his void sent. I do think we will see Zenos' presence at some point because they are clearly going off the idea that they want to draw a parallel between the way that we approach the situation of the eventual solstice with the way that Zenos views the world and the way he acts. They are not even trying, they deliberately drew that parallel in a very in-your-face way with 7.5 Part 1. Got to imagine there's going to be more to that. Maybe we have like PTSD illusions or visions of Zenos in a similar way to Oddbird talking to us throughout Shadowbringers, but in a more we're having a mental breakdown kind of way maybe. Could Zenos just make a comeback? I mean, the dude's done it before. It's entirely possible, but now let's move on because we have something that we absolutely have to talk about, and that is plushies. Next up on the docket, we have @RonRo156, got it right, who says, okay, you say shoot your shot. Here is mine, since you mentioned early in the video that the Odin could be able to possibly body hop. What if he hops into a plushie, I don't know, like a stuffed bear, then the other Winterers jump into plushie bodies as we defeat them. Then the final expansion, we have to fight Halmarut and a band of plushies, lol. Follow-up reply @Nenenrineri, who says, Puppet Mancer reveal would go hard. I'm in two minds about this. Now when it comes to the likelihood, because yeah, that kind of sounds like something they might actually do. I'm not sure I would want them to do this. It would be really funny, don't get me wrong. However, can you imagine it? End of the world scenario. We have not managed to stop the solstice. It's coming. Everybody's going to die. One of the final, maybe even the penultimate boss of the storyline. You queue up for the big trial that we're about to undergo, and this dude shows up. Some could argue that maybe it would break the flow or possibly the tone going on. And I think right now when it comes to Calyx, it's fine because we're in this like transitionary period with the story as we wait for Evercold to actually come out, right? And Final Fantasy XIV has always had some kind of comedic relief, don't get me wrong. I feel like the main concern though would be that going in this direction, even if it's kind of funny for a little bit, might either overdo the joke or possibly undercut some moments that really need that emotional pull, but you're just staring at this dude the entire time. With good writing, you could get it to work. I'm just wondering if it's worth it. Though Puppet Mancer would be pretty dang cool. If I didn't know in the back of my mind that it would just be a limited job. You know what? Maybe he saw the future and this is what happened and that's why he's reacting like this. Maybe I was wrong about you. Now, it would make for a pretty interesting bit of theory crafting with each expansion when we meet a new winter, just trying to figure out what the animal they're going to turn into for the plushie's going to be. That would be pretty funny because I don't know how the heck you would. If we knew ahead of time that Calix was going to be a plushie, who among us would have actually called Squirrel for Ratatoska? You know what I mean? Who would have called that? I guess we shall wait and see though. Next up, we have at Ultimus RBX, who says, I start to feel that besides it being inspired by Norse mythology, there could be some very slight inspiration by Slavic mythology. I believe that the female aura appearing in the trailer is a sacrifice to the crystal to sustain its protection, just a nameless girl being selected to make sure that people survive for the next few years. And it would also be interesting if we would fight people we want to save while also fighting them giants or something. P.S. I like how the Evercold music seems to be inspired somewhat by Foo Fighters' Pretender. I'll always be a fan of that last point, but this is really interesting to ponder in my opinion. Now, I know next to nothing about Slavic mythology. My main point of reference is playing The Witcher 3, and I'm not even sure if that's the same thing. But let's build off the idea that this aura is like trying to sacrifice herself, and herself as an individual is not all that important to the story of Evercold. She mostly represents a long line of these sacrifices. Think kind of like the Emperor of 40k, or maybe even in some way kind of like a Vestal from Bravely Default without the sacrifice bit. And the reason this guy looks sad and depressed in the entire trailer, or you know, in like the 14 seconds actually in the trailer, is because he had to watch one person after the other essentially sacrifice themselves to appease whatever they're being sacrificed to. Let's be fair here, it's Final Fantasy XIV. It's probably a Primal. Also does kind of remind me of Metaphor ReFantazio, just saying. Though it also wouldn't be like the most unique trope in the world, but it could be a very interesting one to explore in the confines of Evercold's story. I also think there's another possible interpretation of what maybe is going on here, and we have to kind of go back to Final Fantasy XIII. Now, I haven't beaten Final Fantasy XIII yet. I've been streaming through it though, and the more that I play the game, the more I'm becoming convinced that Final Fantasy XIII is going to have a massive influence on the story of Final Fantasy XIV Evercold. Tell me if this one sounds kind of familiar to you. So, to be very TLDR when it comes to Final Fantasy XIII's game world, it's essentially set in a world above in a place called Cocoon, where the people of Cocoon view the world below them to be basically hell. This place of nightmares where even the slightest influence from the world below is something that needs to be expunged from society, something to be feared. Now, is it one for one with the world and story being presented with Evercold so far? Not one for one, but there are some obvious parallels here. And in the world of Final Fantasy XIII, again, stuff might get recontextualized later in Final Fantasy XIII. I'm only mostly through the first game so far, and there's 2 whole other games I have to play, so bear with me here. But you have this like godlike classification of entity called a fal'Cie, and these fal'Cie can pick individuals to turn them into this thing called an el'Cie. When you are chosen by a fal'Cie to become an el'Cie, you are given this thing called a focus. It's essentially a mission, basically like a video game quest. They say in very, very vague terms, this is what you have to go do. Go do it, and if you fail, you're going to turn into a monster. But if you pass, if you fulfill your focus, congratulations, bro. What, you thought you were gonna go like back home and live your life? Actually, you see, what happens when you complete your focus and you're successful, you are turned into a crystal. So maybe they're borrowing this concept for the purposes of Evercold. And this aura here was given some kind of divine mission, some divine goal of focus, if you will. And she succeeded, but by succeeding, well, the consequences of that are that you fade away into ice or crystal, or whatever the heck this is. Maybe this guy is supposed to be the Evercold version of a fal'Cie. Maybe he's also an el'Cie and he has his own focus he's trying to do, or he's separate to all of this and is viewing the consequences of this cycle. And maybe that's why maybe he becomes a Winterer, if he is the Winterer. Again, it's all just like baseless speculation and all that, if you really want to call it baseless, but again, we only have this one trailer to really work off of, and what they talked about in the last FanFest. But like I said, the more that I play Final Fantasy XIII, the more it really feels like that's going to be a main source of inspiration for what they're going to draw upon for Evercold. Maybe in a very similar way to Dawntrail when it came to Final Fantasy IX inspiration, where it was still its own separate unique entity and elements that were in Final Fantasy XIV, but there was a lot of inspiration from Final Fantasy IX, even if, like I said, they changed them up enough to where they still felt unique to Final Fantasy XIV. I imagine whatever they do for Evercold will probably feel kind of the same, whether it's Final Fantasy VII and or Final Fantasy XIII. But speaking of this, dude, let's get into the next theory now. Next up, we have at Awarel, who says, my bet so far is that the person praying is praying to a primal, the world soul. Oh, please God, no, not again. Or something similar to try to stop the cold from spreading. What my guess is, the impact they are having is probably the opposite, and whatever they are praying to is actually causing the cold, with the Odin guy being the winter. This is also going back to a joke theory we had last time. There's also no chance that the old woman is woke. Her character lacks the attention span to tell a story like that without mentioning a Papa's Peas. Ha 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 ha. I'm kind of torn when it comes to this theory because there's elements to it that I think could have quite a few legs to them, but there's also parts of it that don't make too much sense to me unless they weren't really being honest or completely truthful at the last FanFest intentionally when it comes to the story of Evercold. I like the idea of them trying to pray to something in order to avert what is going on when it comes to this great freeze and frost that the world of the Fourth is undergoing right now. What I am not particularly sold on is the idea that they're trying to prevent it from spreading, because by the sounds and look of it, it's already pretty much spread everywhere. Just the only place the people of the Fourth had to escape to is up in the sky. So like maybe they're trying to prevent it from going even further up. That could be possible. Going back to what I was talking about when I said they were maybe being too truthful at the last FanFest, it's possible that this isn't the case and that this is the worst case scenario if we fail in Evercold. And it's also possible that when we come down to the surface that we learn that there's actually pockets of places that are unaffected by the cold, or the cold hasn't reached there yet. So maybe people like this aura are essentially sacrificing themselves in order to just contain the frost where it's at right now so it doesn't spread to these other pockets or the rest of the world before they themselves are consumed by this ice. Like I talked about before, it is Final Fantasy XIV. We're almost certainly probably going to get a primal at some point here. Let's be fair here, right? We can't be surprised when we walk into a pizza place and we get a pizza. When it comes to this guy being the winter, yeah, it kind of feels obvious. I agree. He kind of just has an air of, I'm the bad guy here, but I'm also going to have an emotional backstory that's going to rip your heart apart. And yeah, like my knee-jerk reaction to this dude is probably going to be the winter, but I also can't tell if this is supposed to be a red herring and they want you to think he's going to be the winter, but it's actually somebody else. Like maybe she's actually a big important character and maybe she herself is actually the winterer, and her plan to cause about a rejoining of the Fourth is by somehow, I don't know, mentally tormenting this one dude because maybe he's really powerful or something, or he has the ability to be the spark that can ignite a chain reaction causing a rejoining of the shard to the source somehow, and maybe she's deliberately mentally traumatizing this dude by making it appear as if she's like sacrificing or dying or suffering repeatedly in front of him, basically haunting him. Do I think that's particularly likely? Not particularly. Does it sound like something they might actually pull? Yeah, not gonna lie to you. I'm just kind of highlighting the idea that there's a bunch of different ways this story could go, but having some kind of grand twist where it's actually they think they're trying to save the shard of the Fourth and what they're doing is going to be beneficial to that goal, but it actually turned out to be the thing that is also dooming their world. That does sound like something they would probably pull. And I think when it concerns the primal theory, it'll be very interesting just to see what these guys actually end up being. We've talked about a lot ever since the first FanFest about what these guys could be, how they probably represent some kind of individual element when you look at the color of their core, that one being green, this one having that color, and maybe they individually represent some kind of element. And knowing Final Fantasy XIV, the way they love to construct an overall narrative, maybe throughout the story of Evercold we'll have to go like de-ice a refrigerator or whatever and just go through these guys and kill them one by one to restore the element to the world of the Fourth. Maybe that will have some kind of massive repercussion we weren't anticipating that's actually going to doom the Fourth. Or maybe they'll pull a Shadowbringers where we think we've won the day, but then it turns out someone swooped in at the last second and now the world's even more screwed than it was before with these guys. Are these guys some kind of weird machination conjured up by somebody? Are they just primals? Are they some kind of godlike entity? I think in a lot of ways, they're just as interesting to me as the two aura people over here. And I'm so fascinated just to find out where the story of these guys is going to go and how they're going to play a role in the story going forward, because they look absolutely massive. So I'm just wondering, when we inevitably have to fight one of these, how is that going to actually function? Do we shrink them down? Are we just going to have a giant scale fight in Final Fantasy XIV? Or are we just going to fight some kind of like manifestation of energy or whatnot on top of the little disc that's on top of their heads here? Or maybe it's on top of these discs that the people of the Fourth have actually built new homes on. I, for one, am very interested to find out more. Now, here's where you come in. Leave a comment down below with your own predictions for what's going to be revealed, showcased, or presented at the Berlin Fan Fest. Leave your predictions in the comments down below, and I may react to them in a future video before the Berlin Fan Fest. And while you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis is ending its service. What went wrong, but also why am I optimistic for the future of Final Fantasy VII, and what could this all be leading to? Want to find out more? Check out this video right here. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again!